Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Why Science at the Northern Ireland Science Festival 2026. My name's Victoria Sims. I'm a Professor of Developmental Psychology at Loughborough University, just very recently. And I'm really delighted to be the chair of the board of the Northern Ireland Science Festival. Professor McCarthy, I'm not going to give big introductions because we're going to find out all about these two to a greater extent, but Professor McCarthy is a renowned researcher in nanomedicine with a huge number of patents and spin-out companies, very busy, very busy. But in 2024, Helen was appointed as the executive's first Chief Scientific and Technology Advisor, a massive job with really great impact. And we might hear a little bit about the turmoil that goes along with these types of roles. Dr. Archibald may be better known to most of us as a Sinn Féin MLA and the Minister for the Economy, but Caoimhe also has a deep interest in science, holding a PhD in molecular mycology. And if you don't know what that is, I'm sure you will find out this evening. And Caoimhe has a real focus on how scientific discoveries and infrastructures benefit our economy. So thanks for joining us all tonight, and thank you to Helen and Caoimhe. I'm going to start with a question that's very predictable by a psychologist. You know, I'm a developmental psychologist. I believe that everything is sourced from our childhood. So was science something that always interested you? Do you have any really specific fond childhood memories of getting your hands dirty with a bit of science at home? Caoimhe?
So no.
Great. I'm wrong. My whole discipline is wrong.
So I think I came to science later in life. As a child, I was probably more like literary focused. So I would have been big into reading. Really loved that side of things. I would always have been good at maths and enjoyed maths because, well, I found it easy. And I suppose as a little kid, like when I was a toddler, I wouldn't maybe have had the traditional little girl toys. I would have had blocks and cars and everything else. So I think that in some ways influences you. It's the kind of logical side of your brain. And I think later in life, I was kind of guided towards science by teachers in secondary school. I wanted to do law. And then was kind of put off law, so, you know, that old story that certainly people of, I think, my age would have been told about how difficult it was to get into law if you didn't have family in law and all of that sort of stuff, and encouraged to do sciences, which I did. And I'm really glad I did because that's where I found my career.
Fabulous. What about you, Helen?
It's complete opposite, I would say.
Wonderful.
Yeah. I did not enjoy school at all. And I can safely say, hand on heart, if we think about scientia, which is where science comes from, it's about essentially knowledge and in its broadest sense. So I would challenge the traditional view that thinking that it's STEM subjects is just science. I think it's everything. But when I was a kid, I followed instinct. I probably still do that a bit as an adult. I didn't really read very much. And I had the most amazing grandfather that you could ever meet. So he was a welder. And essentially, when I was born, as probably happens not as much now, but you got left off with your grandparents while your mum and dad went to work.
All the time.
Yes. Yeah. So essentially, I got left off there and I'd arrive at their house and my granny would be out doing shopping or whatever. And my granddad would say, we have a problem. The front doorbell isn't working.
Disaster.
Yeah, so then we would fix the front doorbell and that would be the project for the day. And then we had another problem whenever I put a lollipop stick down the sink. So then we took apart the sink and fixed it again. And then we had another problem when I broke one of their windows with a tennis ball where we went to a glazier and we fixed the pane ourselves. So, and that continued on in everything that we did. So, for example, I just loved finding out how things worked and how you could fix them. That didn't pan out so well whenever, so I was, apologies, I don't mean to offend anybody in the audience here, but I probably will. I was brought up and I had to go to this thing called Bible class. Right.
Must have been through that experience.
And it was quite the experience to the point where I was asked to leave the Bible class.
Ellen.
Because the science didn't add up.
Okay, yeah.
And so even now, the teacher of that class, who's probably close to 90, would meet my mum and always say, the questions that I got from your daughter nearly sent me over the edge. And I think that's how the teachers felt about me as well, to be fair, in school.
So that was your kind of beginnings, and I think it's always lovely to hear about the close familiar influences. My dad owns his own manufacturing company, and he had a lab in his business. This is before health and safety, and we used to go in the summer holidays and experiment in this lab with all of these food dyes and stuff. And you know, getting your hands dirty with those bits and pieces, those bits and bobs, and solving those problems. I think it's always interesting to hear how people kind of navigated their way through those experiences in early childhood. But you know, thinking about the kind of steps that you take into a career in science, you know, do you reflect on any major scientific discoveries or scientists that have inspired you to take those steps towards science? You know, Helen, was there anyone you were reading about when you were, you know, choosing sciences at school or stepping into university that you kind of aspired to be like?
So I would have also come from on the language side, you know, when you were a kid, and everybody's going to remember this, you were asked the question, write a sentence about these 5 words. You always used to get that. So let's say the word was cat. I would write the cat is black. End of. Okay? So there was no, you know, kind of flooring about it, and that really vexed my mother quite a lot. But on that note, the reason why I like sciences was it was right to the point. There was no messing about. There was none of this having to think and write emotion or any of that stuff. So you'd be unsurprised to learn as well that I absolutely adored sport in school. In fact, you really wouldn't see me much at many of the history or language classes. I would have basically legged it over the back of the pitches onto the Murray Golf Course, where I had a spare set of clubs in the golf pro shop, and I would just go out and play instead of going.
You sound like a nightmare.
I was an absolute nightmare, 100%. So your question really is, what inspired me?
Yeah.
The outdoors, plants and animals.
Yeah.
That was my happy place. I can remember when I was 14 and we were doing our Bronze Duke of Ed, and, you know, I wouldn't necessarily say that we were, you know, particularly well off or anything like that, but we got the money to get hiking boots and a rucksack, and off I went to the morns, and we did a walk and we camped just under Hen Mountain. And I can remember everybody was in their tents, and I climbed the mountain and sat there and watched the sun setting down, and I thought, this is me. This is me. And as my wife will attest to, who's in the audience tonight.
Dragged along, I heard.
Dragged
Helen.
along, yes, dragged along. Our summer holidays consist of now going to the Alps, going to the Pyrenees, and doing a hike and destroying Denise. But then afterwards, we always get to go to a wine region or something like that.
It's a hard life, isn't it?
But the point is the outdoors, plants and animals, that was always my thing. And that's what inspired me.
And what about you, Caoimhe? What inspired you?
Into science.
Yeah.
As I say, I kind of found my way there.
Yeah.
I'd never actually, probably still don't know what I want to do when I grow up, but but yeah, I just followed the subjects that I enjoyed. So I ended up doing A-levels in chemistry, biology, maths and French, and went to Queen's, did a degree in molecular biology, because I suppose that type of science actually really interested me, DNA and how things are made and all of that. And that's essentially where my career ended up.
Yeah.
Actually not dissimilar to Helen. I spent quite a bit of my kind of teenage years in Scouts doing similar type of activities, camping and hiking and all the rest. And funny, my holidays now resemble those, bit of Camino walking and stuff like that. But so yes, I think that the world kind of, the environment that we live in, those things do really inspire me and still do. Really enjoy getting out and about and seeing new places. But as far as my career goes, it kind of found me.
Isn't that a lovely thing to be able to navigate around the world and for you to kind of come across something that motivates you so much? in terms of our education system, I'm very passionate about our education system. Thinking about the teachers that you were interacting with, I went to the school that was founded in this building, Victoria College Belfast, and Margaret Byers was an amazing champion for women in education. So I always think about her. But my school experience was Mr. Bell, the biology teacher, who let us sit and drop pipette drops of alcohol on fruit flies. They all died. Nothing survived. And I haven't taken those skills and applied them to psychology because that would be awful. No children die in any of my experiments. But were there any educational people, were there teachers or lecturers that really hooked you into their science, that kind of pulled you along the way in terms of inspiring you to keep engaged? Helen?
Yeah, I mean, there was two people that I could probably cite. The first one, who was not a scientist at all, was the head of sixth form at my school, which was Hunter House College. And this lady, Ruth Miller, was probably the difference as to why I've made something and I'm not currently a criminal. And I'm literally not joking. The difference between, being on the right and the wrong is
it's
for
slim.
people that don't have a huge support network around them, is one person believing in them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Ruth believed in me and gave me license to kind of say, I'm sorry, I was late. It was the bus, even though I walked into school and stuff like that, But she could see something that I think others put down. When you question a lot, you get into a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
A lot of trouble, which is really sad because that's where you really, start to ignite conversations. And you want to have not confrontation, but challenging conversations where you learn. And so Ruth definitely inspired me. Once I got to university, I really did find my feet. I really did come into my own, because when I was at university, I didn't really have anybody telling me what to do. And it won't be a huge shocker, I'm not really great with people telling me what to do.
Really?
Yes. But then I sort of motivated and sort of was inspired to I wanted to achieve for me, not for anybody else, but just for me. And that was great. And I remember we had this field course, and it was down in Jordanstown. I went to Coleraine. I didn't get into Queen's because I didn't do chemistry A level.
There's nothing wrong with going to Coleraine. I've spent 13 years in the middle of a field. It's beautiful.
Well,
I'm from there.
And there you go.
let me tell you this, right? Okay. I didn't even get into an honours degree course. I scraped into an ordinary degree in biological sciences. And by the end of the first year, I then got on the honours, and you could decide what you wanted to do. So I did applied ecological sciences because, again, plants and animals were much more interesting than humans. And actually ended up getting the first class there for 8 years. But people had written me off at school, like literally written me off. I used to get called Sport Billy.
Helen.
But that's okay, because I think young people need to understand that, and also older people, that you can write people off, and people mature at different rates and at different levels. Yeah. And when we did this field course down in Jordanstown, and I remember we were measuring, the beach in Jordanstown, and there's a big sort of sewage pipe. We were measuring kind of the periwinkles and the limpets and all the rest of it. And I actually really enjoyed it. And I had a great time. And there was a professor there called Sam Irwin and another professor called Sue Fitzpatrick. And they spent so much time with the students and were really knowledgeable in their subject area. And they really did inspire me at that particular period in my life.
And it's that infection, isn't it, when someone's so embedded and ingrained in their discipline that you can't help but go along with it. But I think also sometimes as academics, people are racing around everywhere, and it's the time spent with our students that is just so valuable.
Yeah.
Caoimhe, was there anyone in your university or school experience that kind of really sticks with you?
Yeah, so I was one of those kids that enjoyed school and performed, I suppose, well academically when I was at school. And I don't have standout teachers, but I have a lot of teachers who really supported me, and I went to Lorraine Coleraine, and it was a school, I suppose, that would have been traditionally strict and would have been seen that way, but it actually had a really supportive environment. But I suppose who inspired me would have been my parents. They were the type of parents that encouraged you. You could do anything if you work hard at school, kind of thing. And my mum had went back to university when I was about 6 years old. My brother was about 3 months old. He's our youngest, and she went back to train as a teacher. And so, it was always a pathway that was accessible to me and where I wanted to go, because that's what I seen my mum doing, kind of thing. When I was at Queen's, I did molecular biology, but it was actually only in my final year when I was doing my honours thesis that I suppose I really got into the area of study that I would eventually make my career in. And when you're going through modules in university across your various subjects, and you're doing practical classes, because my subjects were all kind of science focused and all had practical elements. But it was only when I actually was doing my honours thesis and that dissertation project that I first had that kind of hands-on experience of doing molecular biology, which actually became very relevant later in my career when suddenly everybody was talking about PCR and RNA viruses.
All these very important things in our lives.
Yes, but that's essentially the area of study that I did. I became I did my honours thesis. I went on, and then I was offered an opportunity to do a PhD, and it was in molecular mycology, as you mentioned, and I during my PhD thesis I looked at, I suppose, molecular development in mushrooms. So that's the mycology
here we go.
angle.
Big reveal, mycology, mushrooms. I didn't know that.
And so I did a very kind of I suppose, dry PhD in terms of particular genes that are involved in the development of mushrooms. But I went on then to become much more applied in my career later on, and I focused on diseases that impact mushroom development. So the stat that probably will surprise a lot of people is that mushrooms are worth more to our economy north and south than potatoes. So there you go.
I was going to ask you, why is mycology important, but you've kind of answered that for us.
It's actually a really important crop, and there are diseases that impact on it that are really damaging economically. So I was helping mushroom growers find solutions to these diseases that were impacting them and hurting them economically. But to get back to the question, I had, I suppose, 3 women throughout my career who I guess were mentors. One, when I was doing my PhD, who was actually my internal examiner for my thesis, who really supported me through that process. And she was a strong, independent woman who had a very long career behind her, but she was really encouraging of students. I then had a couple of women that I worked with later on in my career who, again, were just really strong mentors, who were, all 3 of them, in fields of science that would not have been predominantly where women worked, in horticulture and in agriculture. And yet they were all excelling in their fields, pardon the pun. And it is important that you have mentors. It is important that you have people to look up to, but they were also the people that kind of empowered and facilitated you, and supported you to go into the roles and to take on different levels of responsibility. So that's something I try to do now in my own life as well.
Yeah, and I kind of think in my own discipline, the first female professor of psychology in Ireland was given her chair in the year 2000. Carol McGuinness, Professor of Psychology at Queen's University, and I think about what her pathway must have looked like in contrast to mine, because I always looked at Carol. Carol's does exactly what I do, psychology wedded with education, and such an inspiration. But to be able to see where she got to in the year 2000, like it's like really close history, is kind of transformative when you see those people moving ahead of you. Helen, I have to ask, how did you go from knee deep in a sewer pipe to thinking about nanomedicine? Like that's quite, well, I feel you're probably going to show me a beautiful connection, but how do you make that transition?
So it's all about understanding how things work, and it's all about critical thinking and being able to think outside of the box. So in order to fund myself through university, even though I was in Coleraine as an undergraduate, I was also a member of Queen's OTC. And I was set. That was me. I was going off to Sandhurst to be a Royal Engineer. That was it. End of story. That was what I was doing. And then after getting the good grade in the undergraduate, I got offered back in the day a PhD plus a distinction award. Now back in the day, that was an extra $2,500 a year to do a PhD.
Fabulous.
On top of the 5 that you got. I also got offered a PhD from Queen's as well, but they were only giving me $5,000. So I thought, well, you didn't want me the first time, Queen's.
You've lost me.
You've lost me now. So I ended up doing there's a wee bit of a story to this, starting the PhD in Coleraine. And it was in spiders and aphids. And I can remember standing in a forest somewhere in the middle of Coleraine. Apologies, Eva. Holding this white sheet, shaking a tree for spiders to drop down. And the bubble over my head was literally, what are you actually doing, Helen? So what I decided to do then was I said, after 3 weeks, this is not for me. And I'm not really a quitter on most things, as you can tell, as being CSTA. I wanted to quit after a week, but I've hung in there. And so basically, after saying, I don't want to do this anymore, they said, Ulster didn't want to lose the scholarships. Universities never want to lose a scholarship.
Definitely not.
They want to keep the money that DFE gives them. They don't want to hand it back. So they said, is there anybody you want to work with? And I said, Sue Fitzpatrick and Sam Irwin, who I worked with in my undergraduate down in Jordanstown. So they transferred me down to Jordanstown. And there I did my PhD, started it 3 weeks late behind everybody else and finished it in 2.5 years. And it did it on how parasites change the behaviour of periwinkles to climb to the top of the rocks so that seagulls eat them first to perpetuate their life cycle, right? And then how an intermediate host of this, which is the crab, basically releases the Sicaria, which is the next phase of the life cycle, only during nighttime. 4 papers, front of BBC Wildlife with one of them. Used to go out to Muck Island on a boat and in a bird hut and collect periwinkles every month with a hard hat on because the black gulls were dive bombing me. You might say, what's the point of that? Well, the point is, because I really enjoyed it and I did it pretty quickly, 2 floors down from me were 2 amazing people, Professor David Hurst and Professor Tracy Robson. They weren't professors back in the day. David was, but Tracy wasn't. And I had 6 months left in my PhD. And when I was writing my PhD up, my mum was a bit unwell. So I wrote most of my PhD up sitting in the city hospital, pretty much, which kind of made me think, with the greatest respect in the world, because I did get offered a postdoc job in Aberdeen doing some European survey on fish and parasites. And I thought, you know what, I want to learn a bit of molecular biology. So came over to the dark side. And Tracy and David said, look, we would love a spare pair of hands in the lab to help us out. And during my PhD, I'd also did quite a lot of animal work where we grew parasites on chick membranes. And they needed basically somebody with animal experience to help finish their studies. And so I went down there for 6 months, wrapped up all their studies, got them a couple of papers in the offset, and got a postdoc in prostate cancer gene therapy. Back in the day, between David and Tracy in Jordanstown, and also Trinity College Dublin with Mark Lawler, believe it or not.
What a move.
It was quite the move, yes.
Very impressive.
Yes, quite the move. And then what happened after that was, you may know that Ulster made the decision that the research radiation group was going to move up to Coleraine. David and Tracy didn't want to do that. And so Queen's School of Pharmacy offered them like a whole come to us. And so I went to the School of Pharmacy in Queen's as a research fellow, and 2 years later got a lectureship. Now, you might ask, how on earth am I doing nanomedicine, right?
This is my big question,
Yes.
Helen. This is the fundamental question.
Yes. So whenever I started as a lecturer in Queen's in 2006, a professor across the way in the same faculty, I said, I'm going to build delivery systems for gene therapies. And they said, why are you working on gene therapies? Nobody works on that. So I went off to the States and I got a Royal Society travel grant to go off to the States. And I picked somebody called Arash Hatifi. There's a great story behind this, by the way. I picked this guy called Arash Hatifi in Washington State University who knew how to build, they weren't real viruses, but they were viruses made out of amino acids that would mimic viruses and carry genetic cargo into cells. So I went over there and I spent 3 sabbaticals over there, 2 in Washington State University, and the last one was in Rutgers, which is number 6 in the US for pharmacy. It was a brilliant experience. And I learned so many technologies. It was unbelievable. And when you came back and you realized that people's hadn't really advanced with the times, that was incredibly frustrating. So I just built my network in the States and over in England with all the catapults and all, really good. And I collaborate with all the universities in the South as well. So just really built the network up that way. And really, if somebody says you can't do something, you may as well say, that's a red rag to me. We're going to do it. And I love what I do. I love building delivery systems for messenger RNA vaccines, for DNA. And we've actually built a delivery system now, which is the basis of the second spin-out company, that when you inject it intravenously, bypasses the liver and the kidneys and takes you straight to dendritic cells, which is really important for cancer vaccines.
It's amazing to hear these pathways, and I think the commonality between the both of you are taking those steps, maybe not 100%, Helen, outside of academia, but taking those steps into industry. Was that a terrifying step to take? I know from in my discipline, sometimes people say, oh, you do that step and you're never getting back in again. The door will shut behind you. Was that a worrying step to take, Caoimhe, or was that the natural progression?
In some ways, it was the natural progression, and in some ways, it's you follow the opportunities that arise for you. So I had a little bit of a detour in between kind of completing my PhD and finding a postdoc opportunity. And I actually spent a bit of time working as a microbiologist. I worked with Coca-Cola for a short period of time. I worked in AFBI for a period of time. And I also actually quite the detour and spent a little bit of time as a statistician in Israel.
I think everyone does a wee stint there.
Because my PhD, obviously, you have to be able to show the statistical, the veracity of the data that you are evidencing. And so I had quite a bit of that in my thesis, and it was something that I was able to put to practical use. But I had this opportunity that arose to do a postdoc, and I think for me, applying the research is really important as well. So the practical solutions, they actually engage in with businesses and being engaged with industry. It was something I actually really enjoyed, engaging and understanding the problem and then trying to find a solution, and that was actually going to have a practical application. That's something that motivated me, and that's where I spent the rest of my career working up until I took the step to go into elected politics. And I suppose even that step, I always say there's a lot of transferable skills between what I did previously and what I do now, and all of that stuff like around the critical thinking and the analysis and the attention to detail and the ability to absorb material and communicate it in a way that's accessible. Like all of those things are things that are useful to me now as well.
Yeah, Absolutely. Helen, I can see when you talk about your spin-outs that kind of the excitement grows. So it feels like in terms for you, just a really natural step to be able to go into industry.
Yeah. Can I just say two things?
Yeah.
It's actually great, number one, to be able to call Caoimhe tonight and not minister, which you normally have to do.
I didn't ask permission for that, but I just went for it.
And number two,
Forgiveness is one thing you go for.
it's great to have a minister that has a PhD.
Absolutely,
because
yes.
it's so evidence-driven in
Yeah.
decision making, which is brilliant, and it makes a massive difference. It makes a massive difference to my life, but I'm sure the decisions that are made are not just on a whim. So I think that's really big as well. I'm not saying that because I have to work for it, but I'm just saying it is, for me, it's really refreshing as CSTA that I'm in that situation. But let's get to spin-outs.
Yes, please.
Okay.
But no, I really want to reiterate what you said, because I think as academics, we produce this bundle of research, and we hope that research will lead to evidence-informed policy making. My work, teaching that's evidence-based, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there's nothing more disheartening to see that evidence just be thrown in the bin. And it's really important that we have people who are qualified, I think as well, of Naomi Long with engineering background.
Yeah.
Those kind of people who are thinking deeply about the evidence is so important for government.
Yeah.
And I recognise that government is not an easy place to be, nor is your job, which we will come to, Helen.
But I haven't got long enough to cover that.
No, but we appreciate that as a society, that we have people who are highly educated, who can critically think their way through the evidence base, which is really important. Yeah. Now on to spin-outs.
Spin-outs, okay, right, okay. So whistle-stop tour of that. So I was sort of made professor in, 2016 or something, and I thought, with the greatest respect, I need to do more. I need to be challenged. If I'm not challenged, I get so bored. It is unbelievable. So I thought, look, let's try and spin this out. So we obviously had the patent, and that was granted. And we went on and we won Invent NI in 2017, the All Ireland Seed Corn Awards. And that gave me money to go to the States to interact with companies to help them apply and use the technology. Long story short, we were going incredibly well from 2017 until about 20. Well, actually, we wanted to use the technology for mRNA vaccines, and so many investment houses say, why are you doing mRNA vaccines? Funny enough, whenever COVID struck, two investment houses came along at the same time and wanted to put money into the company. Now, this is one of my big bugbears at the moment. I don't think we do enough for innovation-driven enterprises, and the way we set our companies up with patented, protected technology is actually lining them up to actually leave the country, quite frankly. And so on that note, two came along at once. And at that time, I don't think there was really due diligence. And for 150,000, Queen's owned 33% of the company, which is a huge amount for a very small amount of money. And so, long story short, and not breaking any NDAs or legal requirements, I'm not actually joking, they invested in the company, and we went through the first stage gate, and the investment house was a wholly owned subsidiary of Sino Biopharm, and it was Invox Pharma, and it took over three companies, ours, and one in Cambridge and one in Belgium. And what happened was, with the second tranche, they were going to go to take majority control. So we had to go through the National Security Investment Act. We were the first spin-out company in the UK to do this. And there was no recourse for the company to engage with government, which is something I'm trying to change, to say, look, are you happy with this investment going through, or are you not? We'd built the company up to 25 employees, and we had 5,000 square foot of premises in Catalyst, and we built it up to an 80 million valuation. And some of you may know that we had a lot of visitors coming over from the States, and quite a few of them said, Helen, look, we would like to kind of get involved in your company and essentially buy your investors out. The investors wouldn't let that happen. They then had board control. The day after they took board control, they put 47 policies into the company, which meant that it wasn't about the science anymore. And so whenever I challenged them on the board as to what they were doing and where they were going, about in 2023, 16th of November 2023, the CEO of Invox Pharma came over to the company and sacked me from my own company from challenging them. Oh, and kid you not. And so told the rest of the employees that they were not allowed to contact me or communicate with me, and they were so scared with their jobs. Within 6 months, the employees were all made redundant. There are now 39 patents in China. And basically, I had a non-disclosure agreement put on me. I had non-competes on me until August that year. And that was a very, very difficult time. The day after it happened, my postdocs and PhD students were in the premises, and they had to leave as well. So we went up to Queen's, and I spent the next day cleaning the laboratory in Queen's, so it was going to be okay for the postdocs and the PhD students, and kept going. Yes. Now, what I would say is during the daytime, it was business as usual, and at nighttime, I then sat on the computer, and what took me 6 years to build the first technology took me 6 months using large databases and AI tools to pull out new delivery systems. And I had a brilliant PhD student, and the loyalty from the PhD students and the postdocs was phenomenal. I was thrown into 2 legal cases. And then what happened was the day after the non-compete stopped, on the 11th of September 2024, I filed the new patent. And 1 year to the day, I actually incorporated the new company, which is called Xaphe, X-A-P-H-E. And Xaphe is, myself and my co-founder, we're both Generation X. The delivery systems are amphiphilic, pH responsive, and they get the drugs out of endosomes, and that's why we're called. And it's a homonym for being incredibly safe, so you can give it multiple times. And we set the company up in a completely different way. So I actually am hiring a lawyer to license in the IP from Queen's into this company. So they don't have any equity stake in the company at all. They'll get revenue share of net receipts, and we have a bioservices arm of the company that we generate funds from. But the other, if we do develop any products, there will be new companies underneath the parent companies. So there will be no opportunity for investors to come in. The 3 companies that the investors took over, and one of them was in Cambridge, are all destroyed.
It's heartbreaking when it's your.
But I would have invented this technology.
Yes. So you've taken something that was brutal. It sounds absolutely brutal, and being able to build yourself back up again into something that's transformative.
And 20 years of research on the previous technology, I wasn't allowed to work on it anymore. And you're completely on your own. Like, you're vulnerable as an academic, hugely vulnerable. And so, you know, using that experience and using the loyalty of people that stood by me was incredible. And, you know, what we're building now is really exciting. And yes, it's a long road to license the IP in. We're nearly there. It's taken 18 months. I kid you not, 18 months. But we've nearly done it. And we have already secured enough runway for the next 18 months. And we've just found out last week that we got our first Innovate grant. And, you know,
congratulations.
So this is the new way, and this is the way a lot of the companies in Stanford operate and in that San Francisco area. You know, you don't always have to take equity as a university. You can do this through a license deal where there is net receipt shares that go back to the university. But because I'm breaking the mold and paying my solicitor to do this is the best money I've ever spent.
Yeah. And you'll not be in the same position. That's
quite the story.
Again. Yes, it's a massive story.
Yes,
and there's multiple questions going off in my head. But what the first question for me is, during that period of time of complete, like, people stealing your baby, you were also taking on a brand new job that had never existed before in Northern Ireland, working with lovely people in the executive, but I'm sure that's a very different experience than working with lovely people in a university, which are also people who are very interesting characters. How were you coping with taking on the first scientific and technology advisor role at the same time?
Well, you know, Denise will tell you that my language has gone to hell, basically. But how did I take it on? You know, it came along at the right time.
Yeah.
You know, when all around me that I thought I could trust and rely on had deserted me, this actually came at the right time. And now I'm not going to say day one, okay, the head of the civil service, there was a response to the COVID pandemic set in front of me. And there was something in some of the early pages that says, look, one of our mitigating factors is we've hired a CSTA. And I could feel the blood drain from my face because it was like, I would get on the phone afterwards and I would go, you are not going to believe. And I'm thinking, I'm probably your biggest risk, not actually your safety blanket in all of this. But that aside, what I would say, working across the executive, is I've been really, you work in a university, right? So,
Yep.
Universities, and I really hope there's nobody more senior than me in Queen's in the audience, otherwise I'm in a lot of trouble. But universities can be quite insular in their outlook. And, even though you know that a university might need to improve in X, Y, and Z, they will always say there's nothing we need to do. We're really good. We're fine. There's nothing to see here. What I found really refreshing across the civil service and across the ministers was that open recognition. Look, we can do better. We need to do more. We need to bring technologies in. We need to innovate our way out of this situation. And it's really great to have those conversations without people being defensive, and you're not criticising the work that anybody's doing. But what you're saying is actually, how do we do this better? And I've really enjoyed that aspect of it, because open to ideas, open to new ways of doing things, open to evidence as well is really good. And anybody that works in a large public sector organisation, it's very rare. You'll hear Hawks or the ministers up saying, we can do better than this. We can do more. We want to do more. This is what we're trying to do. And there's lots of really exciting things going on behind the scenes that you guys don't know anything about, that are related to technology and AI projects and all the rest of it. I just think we're not very good at communicating it.
Yeah. And Caoimhe, that step into politics, I'm assuming that that was a big risk. You're putting yourself out there, but also taking those skills that you've learned, as you've already kind of spoken. Do you want to say anything about that first step outside of into the political?
Yeah, it is a big step. And actually, I suppose the big step is putting yourself forward for election. So you're suddenly in the public domain, and for everybody to comment on or have an opinion on and make assumptions about, maybe more than anything. But like the reasons that I suppose, while I had the career that I had and really loved it and enjoyed it and would most certainly still be doing it, probably in a different way. And it's actually funny you said about how, if you step out of something, you can never go back. I know I could never go back to doing what I was doing, because the technologies and the advances that have been made and everything, it's light years from when I left it. And it would be something totally different that I would be looking back towards. But I think you just continue to evolve in your career. And what I always had the interest in politics as well. My dad was a councillor, so I would have always been really aware of the constituency work and the responding to issues and the need that there is in all of our communities, and that was something that I always was motivated by as well. And there are the reasons that I went into politics, because there are so many things that we need to do, and I was essentially asked if I would want to run for election. And to me, that was an opportunity that doesn't come around, twice in a lifetime. But it was a big step. It was a big decision, because I was essentially stepping away from the career that I had, with eyes wide open. I was successfully elected. I've been elected 2 more times since then. And I had opportunities once I was elected. I was put into positions that I have to say I really enjoyed. I was chair of the Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs Committee when I first went in. I think that there was some synergy with my background, so absolutely. It seemed like the obvious place to put me. And when the Assembly came back in 2020. I was made chair of the Economy Committee, and that's a role I have absolutely loved since, and I'm now obviously in the department myself. But it was that opportunity to be out engaging with people and to be listening to the issues that affect people, and now as a minister to be in the position to actually take decisions that could make things better. Like, there's no bigger privilege that you can have. And it's something that, like, I don't take for granted a single day. I really enjoy being in this role. It is absolutely tough and challenging, and there are days, of course, where, you know, it all feels very hard, but then you go out and you meet people who your work impacts on, and like it is just so rewarding in that regard. And I will say that the role that Helen's doing now, like, she had come into a role that nobody had been in before, and she has the opportunity to shape, and people are responding to that and to the work that she's now doing, and the opportunity to innovate. Like, there is a genuine desire amongst all ministers around the executive table to actually do that. The obvious need to transform how we deliver our public services, like, that means you have to be open to the ideas and the technologies and the innovations that are going to help make things better. Now, we might not always agree about the ways that happens, but certainly I think there's a genuine willingness to look at how we all work better together. And I think Helen's role is really, really important in supporting us to do all of that.
And I'm sure, Helen, you enjoy going back to your childhood roots and just doing a wee tiny bit of challenging.
Well, to be fair, they said that was what needed to happen in this job.
Exactly what you would hope.
Yeah,
in that
so
role.
I'm actually getting paid to challenge, which is insane. Amazing. Because normally I'm getting into trouble for challenging, and that is really good. But what I will say is, working, I find it really strange, but working in the minister's department, when I'm talking about work, I can't go there first name. But anyway, working in the minister's department, there are some things ongoing that are just really brilliant. And I'm going to say something, and you're kind of going to go, this really isn't that big a deal. And I appreciate that that's what you might think, but it actually is. So
try me.
So we've set up that, so you may be aware that obviously there's funding that comes through DCIT and Whitehall, etc., for R&D, and that Northern Ireland hasn't really been that joined up in how it approaches it. It's been very much me, myself and I. So you can't do this role and, have an ego. You just can't, because it's not about me. I did say whenever they interviewed me, are you sure you want me? I said, because it's really not.
Talking yourself out of a job.
No, pretty much, because after what had happened, I thought, yes, I am not going to apologise for being me anymore. Like, I am not going to conform to what other people want me to do. So in taking the job, one of the things that we've done, and the minister and her department have been hugely supportive, is we've a lot of initiatives that we put into the draft research and innovation strategy, but we're actually actioning some of them, and which is really cool. Probably not allowed to say that, but one of them, which is really cool, is we've created an innovation panel, and an innovation panel consists of representatives from DFE, representatives from councils, representatives from business, and representatives from both universities around the table. And the brief is, you're batting for the country. So it's not about a slice of a little pie. It's about a small slice of a much bigger pie, so that we can show everybody that we can work together and that we can actually leverage so much more. Now, I know that really doesn't sound very much, but it does take up an awful lot of my time, having cups of coffee with people to say, no, this is about the bigger picture, and this is about what we can achieve. We've set it up for LIPF, but there are also huge opportunities with AI and with other opportunities that come our way to kind of go, do you know what? What does Northern Ireland need? Instead of us being reactive, we can be proactive and go, well, actually, for example, we don't have any GMP facilities for cell therapies. We don't have any high performance computing once we get past 2027. Yeah. And those are the sorts of things where, you said you would go home of a day and they're challenging days, and some days are pretty challenging. Today was one apart from this. But other days you go home and you go, you're actually really doing something. You're trying to change a culture.
Yeah. And I think I think it's really telling, as I'm sure as academics, we've worked in different places, and sometimes I felt that being in Northern Ireland, a disconnect between the infrastructure is maybe just not right sometimes in terms of collaboration, where we see collaboration happening more spontaneously or more facilitated. And I listening to the both of you, I'm really excited for the future of science in Northern Ireland. We're coming to near the end. We'll have time for 2 questions maybe from the audience, but do you think that the future's bright for science in Northern Ireland? What do you see as the big opportunities for our scientific community? I know it's a big question. Caoimhe.
I see when I look at what our strengths are, and we have amazing entrepreneurs and academics doing such exciting things, and the sectors that we have strengths in, an awful lot of them are science-based or science-focused, and I would be hugely optimistic about our ability, certainly our entrepreneurial spirit, certainly, but I think we have to match it with the investment and the getting right of all of the parts that you have talked about and that Helen has talked about. And if I put on my ministerial hat for a moment, that's what my job is, essentially, is to try and support that and facilitate it, make sure that we are ensuring that the skills support's there, that we have people coming through with the right skill set, that we are investing in the R&D infrastructure and making sure that people have opportunities, because what we really want is people to stay here and to create and innovate and grow their businesses here. And we need to create the environment and the ecosystem to help facilitate that happening. And that's certainly, I see my job as being really key in making that happen, working with all of the other partners, including our 3 universities, and across departments as well, because, you know, we do have to get much better at joining things up.
Yeah. Helen?
I think Join Up is critical. We have a couple of really exciting projects on the go. One of them is the NI collaboration portal, which is almost like a countrywide core technology unit. And believe it or not, we have 480 pieces of equipment on it that are open for our young companies to use, so they can't afford large pieces of equipment.
Yeah.
And actually, the Open University has put forward virtually all of its equipment over in Milton Keynes for everybody to use here that wants to use it, which is absolutely incredible. So I don't want to kind of coin a phrase, but we do need to integrate to innovate. You can't innovate on your own, and you need to join up and work together. And smart people are the people that know what they don't know and go and ask for help to get it done.
Yeah. Thank you. I have so many more questions on my wee list of questions, but I'm going to open it to the floor to see if we have anyone have a question for Helen or Caoimhe. We'll go pink jumper, and then we'll go there. Yes.
I'm Claire McKeown. I work in climate. I used to work in Whitehall, and I've led several successful Innovate UK funded projects. It's just a comment. I've worked in central civil service as well. I think there's some brilliant people in there, but they don't go into academia or industry because the civil service is a very comfortable place, you know, well-paid jobs, pensionable, and that's not a criticism. That's, you know, that's the way it is. But I think if they were allowed to be seconded in with their job secure so they could go back into the civil service, so they don't lose, you know, if that could be encouraged, that would transform everything, because I've learned so much from doing that sort of thing myself. And I do think there's a lot of brilliant people in civil service if they were allowed out to, you know, into academia, industry, see what's at the forefront, as Helen said, of innovation, take that back and fast track decisions. And we're going to have to do this because AI, renewable energy, all of these things, quantum computing is coming really fast. And if we don't have the right people, the right skills in Northern Ireland to take advantage of all those new jobs, we will suffer. So it's just a comment really on that.
Do you want to respond to that comment? Is there anything you'd like to say?
Sure, because I agree, but I agree that it perhaps needs to be facilitated both ways, because, you know, a lot of, and you mentioned renewable energy there, just take that as one example. It's a very complex field technically. So, you know, having the opportunity to learn from industry and for civil service to be in industry, I think that makes sense. Now, we have to get the parameters right, shall we say, and ensure that, you know, that can be done in a manner that can be facilitated by the civil service. But certainly I think it's something we should be open to.
Thank you. Yes.
Yep, you've mentioned critical thinking quite a bit there, and it's then how do we keep encouraging critical thinking the whole way through? Because you mentioned, Helen, you become a troublemaker with critical thinking. So how do we encourage that with the education the way it is as well? You know, we have to pass certain exams and all that there, and critical thinking can then dip down, and then critical thinkers then can be worked out almost. How do we keep that and encourage that the whole way through that education process?
That's a really good question. Obviously, I'm not a primary or secondary school educator, and I don't really think I'd be an advocate for either right now, given my background. But what I would say in university is we would never teach with textbooks. It has to be research led, and you know, there's a lot of policies out there about the use of AI in universities, and I'm sure in schools as well. What you need to remember is that your AI tools are trained on the past. They're not trained on the future. They're not trained on what's next thinking. And I appreciate that, you know, things like PhDs and masters, etc., not everybody does them, and it's not for them, and that's rightly so. But I think we also have a tremendous opportunity with our apprenticeships and things like that to actually challenge in industry. Industry, whether we like it or not, doesn't have the answers to all the questions coming down the track. It doesn't matter how they try to prepare. It doesn't matter what tools they use. You will always need to have critical thinking as a human brain to actually go in there and think about what is going to come down the track next. So for me, that messaging is very clear. And, you know, we have drafted an AI strategy, and that AI strategy is very much about we still need people to critically think on everything to drive the future. So for me, it's messaging, it's getting it out there, it's having a register of all of our AI projects, it's having the conversations at citizens' forums and saying, we do not want to replace your independent thinking and your thought processes. And anybody that tells you otherwise is not thinking about the future.
Caoimhe?
Yeah, I think critical thinking is a skill like everything else. So it has to be taught, it has to be nurtured. And I think it's important that that is built into our curriculum all the way through from nursery school right the way up to university and into our apprenticeships and everything else. So I think it is something that we need to put a big focus on. That's happening. It's happening in our schools and colleges and obviously happening in our universities as well. But you know, you hear all the time about what the jobs of the future might be, but when you go underneath it, it's what the skills of the future. And it is a lot of the time those kind of softer skills, you know, the critical thinking, the interpersonal relationships, and we need to nurture those too.
And I think, you know, given that we're in the midst of curriculum reform, it's a really pertinent question, because that balance of being able to do discovery-based learning, which is science, it's the heart of science, in balance with knowledge-rich curricula is really important. And there's a bit of my hobby horse, which I can end on, which is really a great way to summarise. Look, thank you so much for coming along. We know you're both incredibly busy and taking time out to join the Science Festival. We know you're great supporters of the Science Festival, and given that the Science Festival is in its 12th year, without the support of people in government and our funders, we would be nothing. So thank you for your continued support. Thank you for coming out this evening. Guess where I'm going? K-pop Demon Hunters in the SSE Arena. Yes. So thank you so much for coming along.